All right, everyone, and welcome Dr. Nicole Gruhl to our webinar stage. And so I'd like to read Nicole's bio to you. She's got a lovely body of work. Dr. Nicole Gruhl is an author, doctor of spiritual health, and cheerleader for Agents of Awesome. I love that. Who descends from a long line of samurai. She inspires people to harness their spiritual and transformative experiences for life prosperity, joyful livelihood, and to become the agents of awesome they were born to be. Her books have been featured in leading well-being magazines, and she's been published in peer-reviewed academic journals. Her newest book, finalist in the prestigious Indies Award, is The Power of Notes: How Non-Ordinary Transcendent Experiences Transform the Way We Live, Love, and Lead. She's an advisory board member for Spiritual Awakenings International and co-facilitates the Sydney chapter of the International Association for Near-Death Studies. And also want to mention that she has been a supervisor for the ACISTE Spiritual Coach Training Program in the past as well. So her talk today is titled The Perks and Perils of Awakening. And welcome, Nicole. I'm going to let you take over.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Hello, beautiful ACISTE community. I am thrilled to be here with you. The last time I was at an ACISTE conference was a few years ago, and it was incredible. And I still to this day have maintained lots of connections from that time. So I know this is a powerful community of incredible people out there doing just wonderful things in the world. And I trust that you've been having an incredible conference thus far, and how exciting that I get to pop in here right in the middle. So I will share with you now a screen. Let me get this up. Hopefully you can now see that, the perks and perils of waking up. It's at the end of the day now where you are probably over in the Northern Hemisphere. I'm waking up in my morning, but if it's at the end of your day and you've been on the conference all day, I'd like you to take this moment to just kick back, relax, and enjoy this next talk, and hopefully have a little bit of a laugh with me at some points along the way, even though, you know, we are talking very serious matters, but I'm sure you've been in some very, you know, what shall I say, some very serious spaces all day long. So this is a good chance to just have a bit of a lighter moment. So what is it when we talk about waking up exactly? It's a term that is bandied about quite a bit, but what does it mean? In this community, no doubt you have come across many different definitions, and I guess I really like to stick with a mainstream perspective. I like to stick with, because I work as a coach with experiencers, you know, so stepping out of the academic, I like to work with what is the everyday language that people are using around these things. And so, you know, we have to talk about, well, a spiritual awakening as when we go through an experience where, you know, some of the ways it is described as who we were before and who we are after is completely different. It's, you know, an opening, a paradigm shift into understanding new ways of being and doing in the world. And of course, many people, if they are wanting to embark on a path of spiritual awakening or have some kind of, you know, a reverence for what that might look like, or are, you know, just sincere seekers on the road, often think this is what it is. It looks like, you know, some kind of a lovely pathway that we go upon, and the scenery is beautiful along the way. And at some point on that journey, we will hit that rainbow, we will hit that golden pot at the end of the road, and that will be the end of the destination, and all will be well and life is fabulous after that. But of course, for those of you who have been on the road, it can be a little bit more like taking the red pill and coming into some very inconvenient, uncomfortable truths and knowings after we make that commitment. And of course, having seen certain things, we cannot turn back from experiences that we have had. And so how does one then operate in what can be like the Matrix. Somebody said to me the other day, the Matrix isn't a movie, it's a documentary, which I thought was fantastic. And so how does one operate once having taken something like a red pill and seeing things differently in the world? So interestingly, altered states of consciousness is actually big money these days. At the very edges, at the very creative edges of pretty much all fields, whether it be in even the military, would you believe it? The military, of course, the artists and the creative places, sciences, the entrepreneur space, of course, but even technology and business. No matter which field you go to, at the very leading creative edges of those fields, there are people right now who are chasing, inducing, wanting to make the most and harness altered states of consciousness in order to have those breakthrough moments, in order to be able to see outside the square of the form that they have been in, and to take their field to the next place and the new edge. So this is absolutely fascinating right now, because these altered states of consciousness, spiritual experiences, etc., and transformations are no longer resigned to, a group of hippies somewhere, or crystal lovers, or, somebody over in an ashram. No, no, no. These are now incredibly lucrative, mainstream and creative edge experiences that are taking place. And this is fantastic. So something is shifting in our greater collective right now, because people have clicked onto this. And we know historically that if we look back over people, great creators in our history, that many people have used these altered states of consciousness to bring through their breakthroughs, right? Einstein and dreams, and on and on it goes with the artists, etc. It was these moments of aha, whether through a dream or a revelation, or even taking some kind of a substance, that they were able to bring something forward into the world and give it over. So that is happening at an incredible rate right now. And it's led some people to really ask the question, well, what's going on with our species? Are we becoming super normal? This is a conversation, that's been happening for a little while now, but I find that more and more people are having this conversation at this point in time. Are we even becoming a greater version of ourselves as a species, this Homo sapiens lumina, light beings? And of course, there's a lot of that kind of thought if you go to the new age, now age conversation about, there's always some conversation going on about the world is in an awakening moment, but certainly having climate crises, pandemic crises, it's brought about, I find that it's brought about even more of a heightened conversation around this wakedness of humans on a greater whole. And so no matter how the journey has occurred for you, this one always gives me a little giggle, because, I know for me, I certainly started out as a bit of a clean-cut Paddington Bear and have felt like our little haggard friend here along the way. And hopefully, your life has been a little bit more presentable, but spiritual awakening can certainly push the boundaries, far from the pretty rainbows along the way, even though we might encounter those, beautiful, bliss-filled moments of perfection. These experiences challenge us. They pull us in every direction, because ultimately, at the end of the day, we are humans grappling with something that is beyond the human form, and so our humanness must deal with it. Now, on the road of awakening, there are many models. Some of them you will have encountered through this conference, and there are several models out there about what awakening can look like. How does it happen? What are the stages? And isn't it interesting, because as children, when we birth our babies into the world, it's so obvious, isn't it? These stages of evolution and change that they go to, because we can watch it, we can witness it right in front of us. So we see when they start to, wobble their legs and start to crawl and then start to hold themselves up and babble and talk, and on it goes, right? Until they're these remarkable beings that speak back to us and challenge us and poke us in all kinds of different ways. But somewhere along the lines, we humans tend to stop thinking about human growth and development, perhaps at the teenage years or so, thinking, well, then off we go into adulting and then it's all done. But of course, I've come to see that spiritual awakening and development, it's part of the more invisible stuff that takes place in this ongoingness of what it means to be human as we continue to grow and develop and refine and evolve who we are. And so there are many models out there that are useful to this process. What I want to share with you today is 4 steps that, in working with so many different experiences, have become quite apparent to me that people go on this path. And so I'll outline the 4 steps and then go into some of the general perks and perils of awakening, keeping in mind that those 4 stages kind of hold the background of the greater conversation. So once the Big Bang has happened, and of course, spiritual experiences can either be a Big Bang type of thing where, on Friday you're one person and then maybe you went to a sacred ceremony or an ayahuasca circle or, did a deep meditation or whatever it was. And then on the Monday you find you're completely somebody different. So that's a kind of Big Bang experience, or maybe yours has been more of a coffee drip filter over time, where you've had layers of awakening and stretching. Either way, how it happens, I find one of the first stages after the awakening and the experiences is discovering the gifts of that experience. And this involves, what was that? What on earth just happened to me? And likely that experience has totally shaken me up. It's shifted things. It's opened my eyes into newness, into otherness that is quite remarkable. And so then the gifts come in. We look at, well, what was it and what can I take from that experience? What is it about that experience that has been valuable? And experiences come in many shapes and forms, don't they? And, some of them aren't the love, light, bliss-filled, beautiful types of experiences. Some of them can be absolutely horrific. I've spoken with numerous experiences where cancer was actually their awakening journey. And even though these were quite spiritually savvy people beforehand, it wasn't until they went through a complete body breakdown and challenge and had to face their own mortality in very painful ways that awoke in them much greater things. And so having quite a distressing spiritual awakening like that can be a much harder plumb in terms of what are the gifts of this experience. When you're sitting in prickly thorns to look around and say, what possibly is it about this that can be valuable to me? But when we do find those gifts of that experience, that that knowing is something that can never be removed from us, because we have walked through the fires, we've gone through the coals, and we're able to take away something that was not there in our experience beforehand. So first we discover, what are the gifts of this particular experience or this series of experiences that we have had? And very closely, either at the same time or very closely afterwards, I find experiencers then tend to go through this next stage of, well, then what are my emergent gifts? And so first I have the golden nuggets, the aha of the experience, but now I'm finding, I have also transformed and changed, and maybe I have new abilities. So for example, maybe you were very creative beforehand and you enjoyed your creativity, but through having spiritual experiences, that creativity was turned on, turned up even more. I speak with many creatives who just end up downloading content and go through these very prolific phases of either painting or dancing or however it is, that their creation happens. Some people have things that come about that weren't there before. One person discovered like an operatic voice that was never there before. They weren't particularly strong singers, but then all of a sudden had this opera-like voice. Another common set of gifts that you might encounter are the clairs. And so perhaps you meet clairvoyance or clairsentience or clairaudience. You know, the clairs love to pop up at this stage and become friends with people. And they can be, you know, challenging friends to adapt at this point. If you've never heard anything outside of, you know, external sounds before, and all of a sudden you hear things that are non-visible, that can be really challenging, particularly if they unnerve you in some way or distress you in some way. And of course, this can be a challenging point for some people if you start to say, I'm hearing voices, or I'm hearing things that aren't there, or I can't see. This is, you know, potentially an area that can wind you up into a psychiatrist's office, and it can get quite serious at that point. So our emergent gifts can be like rosy thorns. You know, they can be these beautiful things that come up, but they're not always smooth in the journey. And of course, once upon a time, we had wise elders in the village who had walked these paths before, and you know, they would be able to identify those in the village when they were going through their crises or their awakening or their gifts, and say, this is what is happening to you, and they could mentor them through. But in this modern world that we're in, which is like a barren desert for, you know, that kind of support, aside from ACISTE and some other great organizations, there's very little in the way of support, as we as a community know and understand. And so these gifts can pop up and then become actually very challenging experiences to walk with, and ones that even the experiencer themselves can want to distance themselves from, even though, you know, there's this attraction and curiosity about what's taking place. There can also be a desire to step back and say, I really, you know, I don't want to take that on, thank you very much. The reluctant healer, the reluctant mystic. Yes. But if we do choose to take on those gifts and embrace those gifts and start working with them and understanding what's coming through, both the gifts of the experience and our own personal gifts, what can now happen is naturally there is an innate sense of applying them, taking those gifts now and being of service out into the community. And again, a lot of people can walk this very reluctantly. You know, maybe someone has these spiritual experiences and they find that through their hands they have healing gifts. They can actually lay hands on others and miraculous things can happen. That can be very, very hard, knowing that you might have the ability to help in some areas and other people now want that help when they find out about it. But again, you know, some people would just say it's not mine to have, you know. So applying these gifts is another challenging area now, where as an individual trying to grapple with this greater sense of self, little s and big self, now stepping into society at that interface and all of the, you know, all of the interesting encounters that can happen at that level. And one of the great questions that emerges at this point now is about purpose and meaning. How do I apply myself in a way that is coherent and in alignment with that which I have now become, of that which I understand myself to be? Because of course, one of the things in waking up is it's so hard then to step away from what we know about ourselves as truth and as the correct course to be on. And then after stepping, you know, moving into that interface, the next step up from there, if you will, is to really get those gumboots on. And this, I find, is another level of commitment on the journey of people who have said, okay, this is what my gift is. I've clarified now how I apply it in the world. I know exactly how to step forward. And then this is the next layer of being in solid commitment with the issues that are happening in the world. And so this level of experiencer is unafraid, you know, they are unafraid of stepping out and perhaps saying things that other people aren't going to appreciate, perhaps taking actions that not everybody is going to like. Because they have now become, you know, change agents. I like to call them agents of awesome. They have now stepped out into the world because they can see issues that that are deep, that speak to them. They see a problem in the world, and this world is, of course, just in so much trouble in so many ways. And so they no longer stay in their little corner, but they actually step out bravely. And this can be a bit of an interesting paradox with experiences. When we tend to talk about spiritual experiences, many people are, oh, well, we love everybody and it's all one, and it's all one great big beautiful thing. And yet, of course, when you come to this point of the interface of stepping in committed action in the world, there's all, you bump up against others who think differently and who want to, do differently in the world. And so it's far more complex through these different stages that we go through. So yes, the journey is never straightforward. There are paradoxes everywhere. This journey of awakening is absolutely beautiful and yet excruciatingly painful at times. It is bliss-filled and ugly in many ways. And you can go this way, but then find you're going that way, and then in the end it doesn't really matter anyway, does it? So sometimes it all matters. Absolutely everything, every word that you say, every deed that you do matters. It has resonance, it has some kind of an imprint. And then yet the paradox is on the other side, that of course none of it matters at all. And so being on the journey as an awakened being is part of walking this paradox in the everyday. And of course the universe has this great twisted sense of humor, where just when we think we've got a grip on things, we can be challenged or pulled in a new direction, or those of you that know my story, we can get a refresher at some point. I'll give you a brief insight into that. So I had a near-death experience at 14 years old, and my life's been this a constellation of different STEs throughout. And, I went down the path of understanding, working with experiences, and then, getting into the field and doing some deep dive study, because I'm just such a nerd with this stuff. So getting my PhD in the area because I love this content. And I think I just eventually moved so much into this space, right, into my headspace of working with experiences. And of course, that still comes from the heart. But the understanding and the academic journey. And then, of course, I got my refresher experience. And that happened when I was giving birth to my first child. And in a split second, just like that, I was brought back to the same horizon of light that I was at my near-death experience from decades earlier. And of course, this time I knew exactly where I was. I didn't back then know where I was. I just thought, oh, this is strange. But this time around, I said, oh, I'm having a near-death experience and one of us might not make it. And that, of course, is incredibly dramatic on the outside world, and would have been quite hard to hear for those loved ones that I gave that message to. And yet on the inside, there was a part of me, that greater part of me, that was it was just laughing. It was in hysterics, because it understood that in all of this glorious messiness, this was absolute perfection. It was playing out exactly as it needed to. And so here comes the paradox and the twisted sense of humor that the universe has. And perhaps you can relate to this in your own experiences as well. And of course, it never seems funny at the time, does it? When the joke's on you, it is never funny at the time. But that is the beauty of hindsight, and looking back later on and saying, oh, now I see. So what are some of the perks and the perils of waking up? I'm going to zip through some, and then I believe we're going to switch it into an open Q&A, and I'd love to hear from you. This is not an exhaustive list by any means. I'm simply going to be giving you some of the most common that I've certainly encountered with experiencers, and you will have your own to add to this list. And perhaps there will be some here that you would like to challenge as well, and elaborate on. And certainly if you want to clarify, we can do that. So let's jump on into that. Now, the perks, let's go with some of the perks first. So we can become mighty electrical beings. And this can have funny consequences. A friend of mine was walking home from meditation once. She had a powerful meditation session with a group of other people. And as she walked down the street lights were actually turning off on her way down. And she thought someone was playing a joke on her. But of course, she was just being this, big electrical being at the time, and they were of course turning back on again after she had gone down the street. In a technological age that we are in now, these electrical gifts can somewhat be a hindrance. I meet with people over Zoom all the time, and I have some clients. One lady actually has to put her feet into a sandbox when she sits at a computer, because otherwise there's too much interference, and the technological gremlins jump in. So watches stop, that's a typical one, you know, because what happens is when we plug ourselves into the greater cosmos, it can literally send new electrical pulses through the body. We can become reconfigured in different ways. And it also has interesting, you know, effects on the people around us, because of course we are amplifying levels of ourselves, and so people naturally will be compelled or repulsed by that. Another perk, we might jump into spontaneous states of deep aha and all-knowing, and have these wisdom nuggets that come through us at the most wonderful opportune times. So that can be a lovely experience. But of course, there can just be a knowing of how to tap into tools that serve us to bring about that greater peace and Zen. We understand and can live from a more spacious space within and access that better. We might also tune into more flow states. So flow is a really interesting one for those who have dived into the flow research. Flow has a transcendent element to it. However, it's a transcendent element that is also very organizing and coherent on the level of our consciousness. And that can be quite different to other states, other non-ordinary states that are actually, you know, like dream states, and others where our consciousness is kind of pulled apart in other ways, right? It's not as coherent in some ways because it's spacious, but in our flow states, it comes together, it is pulled together more tightly. And so you might find that through your transcendent experiences, you can access more of these states of flow. So again, your creativity might accelerate, and flow looks different to different people. This is one of the unique pieces that came out of my research, which was very exciting and totally unexpected, is that flow is not only unique to each individual, but flow is actually turned on and turned up through our individual channels when we have spiritually transformative experiences. And so again, that example from, you know, if you were artistic before, now after the experiences, you might be downloading and putting out all kinds of images. You might be, you know, finding that your musical talents have taken on a whole new level, or if you're physical, you know, the dancing, the bodily movements might have accelerated, or if you're, you know, a thinker, your thoughts might be clearer, more coherent than before, and you're able to bring through bigger insights in better ways. So flow states and accessing those, and of course they energize us completely. So that is a massive perk. And from that level of efficiency, we are actually far more efficient when we are tuned into our flow. We can cut off a lot of the dross around that and the unnecessary things, and tune into what is most important. And so we actually get more done in those states, and we feel better all around. And neuroscience backs this up completely. So neuroscience has found that when in flow, we get into these whole brain states. So when you look at the brain, the entire thing actually lights up in a coherent way when in a flow state. And it's very different to when we might be engaged in one task here or one task there, where pockets of the brain lights up. This is a whole brain state, so unique to flow states. And lucky for spiritual experiences, they get usually more and more access to that. Another perk on the path is a sense of freedom and release. You might experience just these moments of the big letting go, and that could be letting go on the physical level of stuff, on the emotional level, on the psychological level, even on the spiritual level, just a sense of freedom and openness, to the point, you know, this is a nakedness of the self that comes through. It is just the pure self, you know, this sense of who I am in this moment. And, you know, to the point where I know, you know, one lady who felt so free about things on her path and so liberated that she jumped at the opportunity to do a nude photo shoot as she stepped into her next stage, her next archetypal stage as the crone, in celebration of women. And so there can be such a big liberation here, of freedom on all levels. But of course, be careful if you have spontaneous desires to go running around naked with that. Find the right places and people to do that, please. Love. This is one that comes up in my experience with 100% of experiences so far that I have, you know, had the privilege to meet with. I'm by no means saying this is a universal experience. I'm just saying that, you know, everyone that I have worked with in some way or another talks about love. Now, love, in English, we have one word for this. And of course, in Sanskrit, I believe there are 96 ways to say love. And in Persian, there are 3 or 8, something like that. And, you know, so we in English, we are so limited on what this concept is of love. And so what I find is when people who've had these STEs or an awakening experience come, so often they want to express or share about some level or frequency of love that they have encountered, but they don't have language for, but it is so real because they have felt what it is. And so one that you may have heard of is in these, you know, a near-death experiencer can often have or in deep meditation, a bliss kind of experience. They can go to these heaven-like realms, you know, places that are just complete love. And, you know, many will talk about it as an unconditional love, or a love that is just so immense and all-knowing and all-accepting. And so that is another way of experiencing that love. And I also find that when our STEers come back and we're in this physical form doing this human experience that we do, there is a need often to refine the dictionary of love and to find ways to express more. So love as a creative force, love as an awakener, love as a repellent. You know, there are all of these different ways that love comes through. So I'd be curious to hear about what that has been for you, and why this can be a bit, it's a perk, but why it can also be challenging is, of course, our conventional notion, especially in English, of love is a very, you know, one person in a relationship with another, often an intimate relationship, and that's kind of about it, you know, or a love between a parent and a child. And we don't, you know, branch much more beyond these simple relationships, but of course there is so much more. The perks are you may also find yourself surrounded by weird and wonderful people who want you to go to weird and wonderful places, and that can open up weird and wonderful parts of who you are, and that can be a real adventure. Tribe is so key on the journey of awakening, to really be with folks who get it. And you don't, you know, I find that when experiencers gather together, yes, there's part of talking about the experiences themselves, but often people don't even want to talk about that because, you know, everyone just has that as a common, as a shared understanding. We've been there, we've done that. We're here doing the human life. Let's talk about that stuff. And so having adventures together is really important. And yeah, we'll get to the perils of it, I guess, after this. So we'll stick with the perks for now. Another unusual one that can happen is you might turn around one day and find that you have a bunch of people who want to follow you, or who are quite drawn to you like moths to the flame about certain issues. And maybe you do or don't want to help out with certain things, but spiritual experiences, because they are different in some way, because they've been through an experience and have, like the hero's journey, they have a key understanding and a teaching, or a treasure that they can walk out with. Other people on some level innately understand that. And so this can come in different forms, like you might go down to the supermarket and all of a sudden the cashier just wants to tell you their life story. You might find that people just open up about things at the weirdest times and want to tell you absolutely everything, and you have no idea why they are telling you that. But it's because there is a frequency and a resonance about you that people are tapping into, that they can be drawn to. The experiment that was done that demonstrates this lovely is the grandfather clock. And you might have seen this video out on YouTube where if you set off a bunch of, the grandfather clocks with the tick tock in a room, you can have hundreds of them. The biggest one that is in the room will eventually, all of the other ones will eventually sync to that one. They can all start off at different times, but they will all eventually sync. And so what that is about frequency. And the same thing, like in this image you see here in the spiritual experiences, when you are tapped in like a radio station to a particular frequency, it has this pull about it. And if you don't like what you see when you look around on your frequency, the good thing is you have the power to shift and change that, because now you are an active co-creator on the journey. But of course, stepping into those leadership roles can be a wonderful thing as well, because again, now we have a sense of purpose in how we move forward with things and how to be of service with our time on the planet. And what that then means is stepping into our superpowers. So as I mentioned earlier, understanding our gifts, understanding our own innate frequencies, that vibe right with other people, where we can lead and step into healthful, nourishing, helpful roles. This is the superpower. This is where we walk forward and do things. So you don't have to be, levitating on a mountaintop to demonstrate some kind of a superpower. But if that is your superpower, good for you. I wish I had that one. And that's often part of, I think, the challenge with the spiritual conversation is, from the outside, many people think a superpower has to look like that. You're either Harry Potter, with your magic stick and boom, creating incredible things, or laying hands on people and, having these hallelujah miracles. It doesn't have to look that way. Superpowers can be so subtle. And again, this ties innately into our personality and who we are. And it's important on the spiritual path not to diss the personality, right? Not to diss the human, although it might be, limited in many ways and have its quirks. We have to work with the shape that we have been given, because in doing so and allowing these greater beyond human forces to work with us and through us, that's when the unique superpower comes through. That's when the gift comes out, and that's when the application is able to happen in the world. And then we can even take those superpowers to the new level and plant our flag and get very clear on a mission and a direction that we would like to go and apply ourselves with in the world. And that can be a really magical journey for those who are clear and committed to that pathway. And it's not an end goal. Planting that flag and saying this is the direction I'm going is not, it's a beginning of another story that happens. This hero Shiro's quest is circular. It keeps going round and round. You get to a point, you then re-enter the non-ordinary realms again, and you come back to the ordinary to, give something back to the world, and off it spins on another journey again. And it just, spirals into greater and greater experiences of this human collectiveness that we are in. And I guess one of the greatest perks on the journey is the ability to sit back sometimes and know that, not even know, just to appreciate the greater perspective that we can hold in a world that is sometimes going absolutely crazy. that can be helpful. And I'm not saying to disengage, you know, as the world breaks down, to step out and be like an ostrich in the sand and ignore the issues. But spiritual experiences have this beautiful ability to take the eagle eye perspective, to rise above, you know, and to understand ultimately, it's an existential view, you know, ultimately I will not be here at some point in my body, and some other part of me is going to live on, and that, you know, it's all going to be okay. Or if it's not going to be okay, where can I put my attention at this point in time, and then to cut out a lot of the noise and to focus on what is truly important. So the perils, let's jump into those. The caution sign, and nobody has the caution sign on the road of awakening, do they? Nobody waves the flag and says, be careful of walking down that pathway. Here's what's going to happen. But anyway, I guess we wouldn't embark on some of the things that we do. Similar to having children, you know, half the things you don't know about until you jump on in and discover it. So the world can seem topsy-turvy, can't it? You know, and this is an experience particularly true for people who have just had these spiritually transformative experiences. The paradigm that we've been operating in, the world that we've come to know as real and true, can all of a sudden, everything can seem upside down. And I mean, the world does seem a bit upside down right now anyway. But if you've had an awakening experience, you can have lucidness and clarity that you have never had before, and the world can seem more crazy than ever. And that can actually be a really lonely place to sit in, because all of a sudden you are removed from, you know, this is the matrix, right? You are removed from what you have been engaging in all of this time, and yet you still have to participate in it, but with a completely different perspective. So grappling with an upside down world can be really challenging. Those around you can think you've gone slightly cray-cray and go, wow, what has happened to him or her on the path? You know, she used to be pretty normal and easy to talk to, but I don't know what's happened since, you know, that. And that can be quite funny and okay to a point, but where it gets serious is if we're having experiences and those loved ones around us, this is where I find it happens most, is our loved ones become scared for us. You know, if either we are in harm in some way, or we might put others in harm in some way, this can be a point where we start the conversation with the road of conventional medicine and psychiatry. And so, you know, I'm sure this has come up many times in this conference so far, and will tomorrow as well, because this is such an important dialogue. Where is the line? There is no clear line in the sand to distinguish between what is a spiritual experience and what in some areas might be called, you know, out of the spiritual realm and into what might be called a level of madness or insanity. And it's such a grey, fuzzy area. And what I find, I'll speak from my perspective as a coach that works with people who have often come through the system, they've come through the mental health system, and they're either, you know, still in some kind of a relationship with it, or still, you know, have a label or medication in some way. And usually by the time they come and meet someone like me, they want to, you know, either reduce it or come off it entirely. What I find with people is they will say some things. Most of them will say that was, you know, an awful experience and it wasn't helpful along the way. But there are some who will say that was the perfect thing. That was exactly the intervention I needed at that point in time. And so we can't, you know, paint anyone with a broad brushstroke. Each experience and experiencer is so unique at their different point in time, and we have to work with the resources that we have: family, friends, professionals, finances, and time and infrastructure around us to help support that experience. Of course, we as a professional community who know that these experiences are real and valid and valuable would like to see a lot more support around that. But it's not always the case for folks who come through. And so this is one very important piece of the conversation that our community needs to engage. One other piece I do find is that people who have been through the psychiatric care system that come out the other end will still say, you know what though? There's still part of the spiritual story that is incomplete for me. There's still something that I need to wrap up or understand and go through. And so that greater peace, that greater energy that is moving through still needs to reconcile itself in some way. One of the hardest parts on the journey is when we just are like two boats in the night with our loved ones and our friends. We're people that we were so close with beforehand. We might find that through our spiritual experiences, we now, our values have perhaps shifted. Some people have a radical shift in their values. Others, you know, just step more deeply into their values and realize that actually, no, I didn't believe any of that in the first place, or I just don't want to participate in it anymore. And so where it becomes hard is, you know, marriages. Our community of experiencers has higher rates of divorce than the regular rates, which are already high enough. And why does that happen? It happens because it's so hard to talk about these experiences. There's language is so limited for our spiritually transformative experiences. It's hard. We ourselves as individuals have to grapple and go through what on earth is going on. And then if you have loved ones around you who don't have the capacity or don't have the willingness to hear or be with you as you go through that, there will be a drift. There will be a drift. And so the relationships is often an area that needs so much work. We don't have to cut cords all the time. Some people take the stance of, well, no one understands me. I'm the black sheep of the family, and I'm never going to be accepted for who I am, and so I have to cut cords with everyone. And that's a very dramatic way of going about it. And there are, I guess, ways to work through relationships and these experiences that don't have to be so harsh. But this is definitely a very prickly part of the journey. Homesickness. You know, after having these experiences, many people can come back just going, Earth, my goodness, it's such a heavy, hard place. I don't want to be here anymore. And this existential question is real, you know, this existential feeling of, well, I know, you know, especially for near-death experiencers, I know what it's like to not be in my body, and it was amazing and beautiful, and I have no fear of death. I'm actually looking forward to going back to that place. And so there can be this longing to be back to what folks will, you know, classify as home with a capital H. To get back there. I think I need to push on in time. Being sensitive, so a highly sensitive person. Look, yeah, as HSPs, you know, we feel everything, right? Every vibration. The world can feel like an extension of our own bodies. We can be around other people, and their emotions can feel like an extension of ourselves. And this can be a peril when it's overwhelming, when we can't interact with the world anymore because we are on overload from stimulus. And of course, yes, in a world where there are so many issues and the world is burning, for people who have gone down the spiritual path, this is personal. This can feel personal. Again, if the earth can feel like body, and that interconnectedness, we know that interconnectedness, it is, you know, we are organisms of this greater organism home that we are on. Then when the earth suffers, we as individuals can suffer. And this can be debilitating for some people, to the point where we might completely shut down because it's just too much and too painful. If anyone listening here has had that experience or is going through that experience, the good side of that is to know that Abraham Maslow, actually thought this was a wonderful thing. He called them metapathologies, these spiritual sicknesses, and he actually saw them as a wonderful sign, that a wonderful indicator on the road of what it is to be truly human and awakening. And he considered that higher than a self-actualized being. He's considered a self-transcendent being, much, you know, well, he kind of flipped his whole model of the pyramid anyway towards the end of his life, but the self-transcendence is an important part that incorporates the self-actualization as well. So look, it can be a bit lonely being the parrot out on the road and standing out and shining your true quirky colors. But look, there comes a point on the journey where maybe that's just exactly what you have to do, and to accept that the mainstream will be the mainstream, and you either find ways to engage with it as your quirky self or to sit aside from it. Either way, it's always good to remember that the goal of the spiritual quest is not to have these experiences, as amazing as these spiritual experiences are. So we don't go chasing the experiences and get stuck on the peak chasing. But the goal is actually to stabilize your spiritual consciousness so that you can live that spiritual life and transform the world accordingly. It is to fully embody and be a human. Be your human self in this earthly world with your wonderful knowing, being, and doing. We're also reminded by many of the great awakened beings that the sacred is in the ordinary. It's in our day-to-day conversations, our neighbors. You don't have to go to India or some great pilgrimage to wake up. It's in your very neighborhood. And once we know that, we are still here on planet Earth with time. And as long as we have time on this planet, there are ways that we can apply ourselves. And there is no shortage of ways in which we can apply ourselves. Andrew Harvey, who's a Rumi scholar and mystic, puts it beautifully. He says, go where your heartache leads you, be that sacred activist. And so you can merge your sacred knowingness with being an active agent on the world, and step into your power, your lioness. Find your roar, be brave, and step forth, because we need you on this planet at this time, perils, quirks, and all. So I will leave it there, and over to you, Elizabeth. I'm sorry, I think I might have gone a bit over my talking time.
Oh, that's quite all right. It was lovely. I'm glad that you got it all in. Nicole, I'd like to go back to something that you talked about on the relationship issue, and that's not something that's been discussed yet today. So I'm really glad that you brought it back. ACISTE research shows that anywhere between 67 to 75% of experiencers end up divorced if they were married at the time of their spiritually transformative experience. And I'd like to know a little bit more about how therapists can work with families that are going through this process. And we do understand that, at least up until now, we know that the value system, the belief system changes so greatly, and that there's not a meshing together of the old and the new. But how can therapists create a dialogue that might be able to shift that, or at least offer a gentler way of being in the separation process?
Yeah, great question. And it's such a deep area. It's funny sometimes and therapists would know this well, like if we imagine the problem here, it's like a red hot potato, right? Sometimes the more we look at the red hot potato and the more we poke at it, the redder and hotter it becomes. Right. And we know in the therapeutic context, it can be really good sometimes and refreshing to just kind of put the potato to the side and have this session where the potato, we're all aware that the hot potato is there and burning and spewing its lava, but perhaps we can just have a session that is completely, on something different, right? And that can be a nice way to work with these, because sometimes when we focus so much on this was, the experience that someone had, and maybe they, it was one that has caused all kinds of problems and issues. Maybe when we stop focusing on the experience so much and all the trauma associated that and with challenges, if we can perhaps turn our attention to something like the wisdom that has come out of those experiences, the golden nuggets, right? Mm-hmm. So again, it's not chasing the experience, but it's looking at what has been the gold that's come out of it. And so there are things like, well, we know that there are things like, what are the golden nuggets? Greater compassion, right? More kindness in different ways, sensitivity to new areas, right? Creativity and excitement about new things and new projects. And so what we can do is turn our attention perhaps to some of those other areas. What are the gold bits that have come out of that, and the qualities that have come out of an awakened person to work with their strengths? If, you know, instead of looking at, gee, they're just a problem in the family now, what are some of the qualities that have come forth? And forget completely about the spiritual experience itself. Let's not even go there or talk about that for a time. We will again get to that, but let's segue a bit to the treasures that have emerged in other areas that we can focus on to then rebuild that strength in the family or the relationship. You know, if a greater level of love has been awakened, well, let's, as you know, as relationship therapists, let's go there and explore different ways of loving and being together, right? Let's forget about the spiritual component, because at the end of the day, isn't it all spiritual? You know, isn't it all, you know, this greater umbrella that everything through some lens can be seen as part of a greater spiritual experience? And so we don't have to talk about just the spiritual. Let's broaden that to just a bit of everything.
Yeah. Thank you. I love that. And if there's a willingness, you know, even a small willingness from both parties to go into that exploration of the expanded love and expanded compassion, to find the wisdom. I think even if we can get them to have the smallest of wisdom, that's a lot of, the smallest of willingness, that's a lot of light can come through a small crack of willingness. So I love that perspective, and I think that's very helpful. Yeah,
because I find that it can be re-traumatizing for people, particularly if, say, you have a family member who has then ended up, you know, down a psychiatric journey. They've been given some kind of a diagnosis, and the family fell apart as a result of that, right? I work with, you know, folks who have gone through that. And so one of the things that we then do is go into, well, what are the strengths that have been built about from that person, right? And how do you rebuild your relationship with your spouse, your children, your parents, your friendship circles, not by focusing on, I've had this spiritual awakening and this is what you need to know now, because no, that's not helpful for anybody. No one wants to be spoken to in that way either, you know. So as the experiencer, take your experiences, take the knowing and the wisdom, and be that change, you know. Yes, and so a therapist can help an experiencer to do that.
beautiful. Thank you. These are exactly the kind of conversations we need to be having here in this 2-day conference, so that they understand, you know, what are the benefits of these experiences and what are the potential pitfalls, as you've said, you know, because there's both. They're both. So thank
Totally.
you. Yeah.
Thank you. It is not a clear road. And, you know, as that image in the beginning, from the outside, many people can think, oh, it's this lovely path with rainbows. And, you know, it's either that, like, oh, it's a lovely journey if people have some kind of respect for the path, or it's, oh, well, you know, off you go with the pixies. Right. And so, no, it's neither of those. It's
Right.
far more complex. Yeah.
Thank you. So we have just a couple of minutes left. Is there anything that you would like to share in closing?
Well, just that I love what ACISTE does, and these conversations are so important. I hope that everyone listening has enjoyed this and got something out of it, and no doubt there's going to be so many incredible pieces throughout this whole conference to walk away with. This is a very robust type of conversation happening, and people are waking up. I mean, people are having these spiritual experiences out there, and without support systems like this in place, it can be like walking in a total wilderness. And thank goodness for the internet now, because people who are searching have more access than they ever did before. You know, I often meet people who said, oh, yeah, I had an experience back in the 70s and I didn't talk about it for 30 years. You know, because there was nobody to talk to, or maybe I had a book or two and that was it. But now we look at us. I mean, we're connecting on other sides of the world and we can have these conversations right now. So let's carry on building the community and the support, and celebrating and assisting people who are going through these experiences, because it's not just about having the experience. The whole thing I've been harping on about is taking those experiences, the knowing of them, and stepping into the world and applying them usefully. You know, that is we are here to have these experiences together. They are not an individual thing. We are in a collective, you know, a collective program, if you will.
Right.
And so let's share with each other. Let's raise one another in this experience. Yeah, in a world that is so divided, let's be a light and help the journey come along better.
Thank you
So
so
thank you.
much. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording here, and just to let everybody know,